Namaste. This is Yoga Therapy Podcast, and I'm your host, Shira Cohen, yoga teacher, yoga therapist, and Ayurvedic wellness educator. In these conversations with experts in the field of yoga therapy, you'll find out what it is and how it can help you and your loved ones to reclaim well-being. We'll touch on physical as well as mental health, physiology, emotions, women's health, spiritual well-being, goddesses, and self-development in the fullest sense. Listening to another story can change ours, so thank you for showing up, and let's begin this journey together. Hey everyone, so today we are joined by Evan Soroka. She is the author of Yoga Therapy for Diabetes and a certified yoga therapist. So welcome, Evan, and thank you for being here. It's lovely to meet you.
Thank you for having me, Shira.
My pleasure. So please let's start with your story and how yoga turned into yoga therapy for you.
Well, I have been practicing yoga nearly as long as I've been type 1 diabetic. I was diagnosed when I was 13. And I think we have a lot of similarities in our stories. Being diagnosed with a chronic illness at that age, there's not a lot of tools or resources for managing let's say the energetic and the psycho-emotional challenges of not only growing up, but navigating an illness at the same time. So I was really struggling mentally, emotionally, physically with diabetes, and I had this friend. It's funny. I've told the story on a few different podcasts, but I'll tell it to you differently this time. But it's more or less, I had this friend who we were like troublemakers together. So in our teen angst, we were troublemakers. And one day she met up with me for our usual teen angst stuff. And she had just gone to a yoga class right before. And she was so calm and so placid, like she did not want to partake in anything. And I was like, who are you? Who are you? What is going on? And her whole face was just different. Her whole being, it was so calm. And I think there was a part of me that recognized that was a potential for myself. And the next week I went by myself. I started going to yoga, and it was so awkward and so weird. I'd never done anything like that before, but what I was starting to experience was a sense of returning to wholeness. And there's like this, for many of us, this progressive purification that happens physically, but then it starts to happen emotionally and then behaviorally. And that really set the tone for the rest of my life up until this point. Yoga always followed me. It's what I did. And because of that, my interest in it, naturally, I wanted to know more. And the self-edification process constantly was taking me to the next level of understanding. And naturally, the next level was to become a yoga therapist. I became a teacher first, like when I was in college, but I recognized I didn't know enough. It was like a typical 200-hour vinyasa training, and I just didn't know enough. I wanted to know more, but I didn't know how to help people. They would come to me and they say, hey, like, I've got this or that. Can you help me? And all I knew was like a sequence. And I didn't know how to apply that for someone or to be able to assess them. And so I recognized that I had a great interest in continuing that evolution. And so going on to become a yoga therapist, I studied with Gary Kraftso in the American Vini Yoga Institute. And it was just such a wonderful program, this application for the individual, but the individual conditions. And naturally, as someone who's been living with diabetes for most of their lives, I wanted to find a way to apply those principles and practices specifically for someone living with type 1 initially, but it has since broadened into type 2. And pre-diabetes as well.
So I wanted to ask, what did you notice? You said you noticed initially when you were doing yoga that it brought you into a sense of wholeness, but how did it affect you physiologically and emotionally?
Yeah. I think recalling how it was affecting me physiologically and emotionally, knowing the mechanisms behind it now, it was purely a regulation of my autonomic nervous system and training it to downregulate as well as to become more resilient to stressors. So my ability to cope with discomfort became greater and greater. So things that were once triggering, I had the ability to withstand that discomfort. And that, I mean, the value of that is priceless, regardless of being a person who lives with a chronic condition. Just being a human, that ability to navigate chaos and to remain the observer, it's, I think, the greatest gift of yoga.
Thank you. Beautiful. Yes, it's very true. Sometimes we forget that that is actually the most important part. I think that's what we're all being forced to see with this COVID and the lockdown and the regulations, what's really important about living and life and people. So when you started to do this yoga therapy with Gary Kraftsaal, how did it change? How did it become more an autonomy in your health and well-being? So not just self-regulating, which is kind of the basics.
What happened was first an awareness of what I was experiencing in my body and my mind. So that ability to identify with clarity what might be out of balance, right? So as things start to slow down, meaning the fluctuations of our mind become less and less, there's less chaos. When there is a ripple of chaos, or whatever you want to call it, a disturbance, it's easier to identify it. So in that distillation, I was able to see more clearly what was getting in the way. Secondarily, having those practices and the education about how to use practices helped me learn to apply specific things for what was going on. Whereas before, I knew that yoga made me feel better. I just didn't know why. And knowing how to do less, like one small practice, how that one small practice could change the whole course of my day or my afternoon, whatever. It empowers this confidence and trust.
Thank you. You seem to distill everything into just a few sentences. It's very beautiful. Maybe that's because you've written this amazing book. So would you say that it's also the sensitivity that you are awakening? Because that's one thing that I heard someone say who was very deeply learned into Ayurveda, was that Ayurveda basically wants you to become so sensitive that any beginning of an aggravation already starts to feel uncomfortable, and you have to address it straight away.
That's a really wonderful way of explaining it. It's just a heightened sensitivity, but also that there's a balance in that sensitivity. We can become hypersensitive, and that onto itself can be a detriment because we're reactive. Every little thing gets to us, right? We feel so much that you can't turn it off. But I think the sensitivity that you're referring to and that I'm referring to is like, it's very clear and spacious. So when we do notice that there is a disturbance, that it's evident what it is, even the minutia of it. Even like the seasons are changing where I live right now. and it's only September, but it's turning into fall, right? So you can feel the air is different. I noticed that what foods I'm attracted to is changing. I also noticed that my body is going through a different process of how it's metabolizing things. And granted, I'm hooked up to a device at all times. It's telling me what my blood sugars are doing. So I can see the metric for how things are trending. And what's cool about that is you can feel the differences in your body as well. But even with the seasonal change, I'm noticing that there's a change. Yeah, there's the minutia, that little adjustment, things that we're not always privy to when we're going about our lives, the day to day. And so what I think yoga therapy and the complementary sister science Ayurveda provide is this beautiful way of us to look and observe ourselves in relationship to all of nature. And so how there's no separation, that we are always under the influence of it. And because of that constant nature of change, we can use the fact of change to point it in the direction that might be more beneficial, right? More beneficial. And knowing like what throws us out of balance, like what are our weaknesses. Or like my vata gets really thrown off. I'm just thinking like last night, I still wanted popcorn. It was movie night and I'm suffering for it now, but I know why I'm suffering and yet I still chose it. So there's almost a freedom in it because I made that choice and it was worth it.
I know exactly what you mean. Sometimes I have those moments. It's already 8 o'clock at night, but I'm really like, I want some cheese and I know I'm going to sleep terrible and feel like shit the next day. But you still choose to do it now and then. We had this conversation with Andrea Trank and it's, yeah, you know that you can do these things sometimes, but it's not something you would do every night.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, why is emotional health important for diabetes in this case?
Well, diabetes, and let me just take a step back and say that there's many different types of diabetes. Type 1 is an autoimmune condition. Type 2 is a chronic illness, a progressive chronic illness. There's gestational diabetes, which is also like a subsect of type 2 diabetes. There's lots of different types, but regardless of the type, diabetes is an intense self-care disease. So all of the decision making, all of the health preventative measures, it's required by the individual. So it's more than just taking a medication. And I'm not saying that other diseases don't require this, but diabetes is because it's a metabolic disease, because it's so intrinsically connected to how we're eating, how we're metabolizing food, energy expenditure. There's so much that someone has to be on top of. And not to mention when things are off, blood glucose dysregulation. So any imbalance in your blood sugars, whether it's towards hyperglycemia, which is high, or hypoglycemia is low, it impacts your energy. And our energy is connected with our mental health as well. So on one level, we've got blood sugars and dysregulation that's impacting our physiology, impacting our energy, how we feel, how we see ourselves, how we relate to the world. But then you also have this immense requirement of self-management, diabetes management. Every day, you got to think about what you're eating. You've got to, for type 1 diabetes specifically, take insulin and have like a measurement of what you're eating for your insulin dosage. And then you have to combine that with exercise and know that exercise can actually make your insulin stronger and you plummet low. So, and then there's all these variables about life, like nothing is completely certain. And then we suddenly have to run here, we have to do this. And so you're doing life while simultaneously trying to orchestrate this balance, this homeostasis that your body typically does without any thought to it, but you're having to put thought into it. And so everything's so connected, from your body's regulatory responses to how you're feeling, how you see, how you think, how you behave. And then you've got the societal pressures. I mean, society at large sees diabetes and they think of it as it's your fault, right? And then you've got familial pressures. So you have diabetes, and then the people around you who care, they're like hovering over you, like, are you sure you should do that? You know, should you really be eating that? They have no idea, right? And so it becomes so overwhelming for people. And people with diabetes, type 1 and type 2, it's about the same metric or it's about the statistically about 50% higher likelihood of developing clinical depression and anxiety. So it's one of those like chicken before the egg situations, like especially with type 2, is depression coming first or is diabetes coming first? But regardless of like the origins and the etiology of everything, these two things they're connected, and you can't treat diabetes without treating the mental health side of things, because that's one of the main things that people are having to cope with. Yeah.
So it sounds like there's the layers we already have of change of daily life, and then all these layers on top, because so much is fluctuating due to metabolic changes. Yeah. And if you would relate it to the doshas, how would you say this plays out? Or that depends if it's hypo or hyper or...
That's one of my favorite things to talk about.
Really?
Yeah.
Doubt.
I'm ready to go off about this right now, but I'll keep it pretty short and concise. So first, you can classify diabetes doshically as well. And let me also say that there's not one type that specifically fits into a dosha. You can have kapha, you can have vata, you can have pitta represented in all types of diabetes. But typically speaking, viewing type 2 diabetes through the lens of kapha is helpful, because it's an accumulation, it's a stagnation. And also the disease process. If you look at it, it starts in something called prameha. Prameha it's like an excess of urine, of water. And so in the developmental process, according to Ayurveda, granted, we can't fit everything equally, our medical definitions, Western medicine with Ayurveda, but the way that Ayurveda views the disease development of what we know as type 2 diabetes is it starts in kapha and it begins to develop, moves towards pitta, then moves towards vata. And once it gets into the vata stage, it turns into something called madhumeha, which is incurable. Whereas in the kapha stage, it's something that could potentially be reversible. There are many different types of prameha. They're not all classifiable as diabetes, but it's to consider that there's an excess water, excess urine. So it's helpful, I think, for therapists out there to view kapha or to view type 2 diabetes with kapha, because how would we balance kapha? Typically, it would be to move it towards pitta, right? And to build some more heat, to get things flowing and moving and circulating. And if you look at the major prescriptions, like lifestyle prescriptions for working with type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes, it's, diet and exercise. So it would be like a Langana strategy, at least according to Ayurveda. Yoga therapy would say it would be a little bit different, but yeah, a reduction strategy. For type 1 diabetes, it's considered, according to Ayurveda, to be inherited. So it like lands you already into Madhumeha, which is a Vata stage. So we also see this as how type 1 it's a vascular disease, and it's impacting so much of our circulation. Not only that, but there's a nervousness. A lot of people with type 1 have a lot of nervousness to them and anxiety. So we can fit things into certain categories, but again, we can't say that like it's one or the other, because I've worked with plenty of people with type 2 diabetes that have Vata disturbances, and actually in order for them to help achieve greater balance with their blood sugars, it's actually addressing that first. Like they want to lose weight, but there's so much underlying nervousness and anxiety as well, that treating that can be the doorway in. And I think for yoga therapists, when we are working individually, it's about finding that doorway in. And so to go kind of back into the beginning of your question, we can also look at hyperglycemia and hypoglycemia through the lens of Ayurveda in terms of doshic qualities. So hyperglycemia, and honestly, I haven't seen this written anywhere, so this is just the way that I see it. Okay, I could, some Ayurvedic specialists out there could say I'm totally wrong, but this is just the way that I see it, and this is the way I wrote about it in my book. Hyperglycemia has a tendency to be more kaphic. Again, it's sticky. It's hard to move, especially insulin resistance. It's more like kapha because it's harder to move, right? It's harder to influence. Some of the side effects of hyperglycemia, just on a day-to-day basis, not talking about like the long-term problems of it, but what one would feel on an acute level is they would feel heavy, lethargic. They might experience brain fog, fatigue, these kinds of things. So that can be helpful for us to understand how one would want to work with hyperglycemia. But again, we also have to consider that although that there might be physical stagnation and mental dullness, that the causative factors of hyperglycemia or high blood sugar for people is also distinct. Is it because you didn't take enough insulin for your meal? Or is it because you're chronically stressed out? Or you had an acute stressor today and that's made your blood sugar skyrocket. So we always want to have that awareness of, well, why I see this number, but can I trace my awareness back enough with that sensitivity we're talking about and assess what reason can I assume or surmise from my best understanding of myself that I would be landing in this number, right? And if I can't, then I would have to make an educated guess, or I would just surrender a little bit, a lot. Hypoglycemia, which is insufficient glucose in the bloodstream. This occurs in a lot of people who take insulin because insulin cancels out our body's counter-regulatory response that naturally allows us to bring our blood sugar back up. When you inject insulin, that hormone, exogenously, so from outside of your body, it negates your body's ability to bring it back up. So a lot of times people crash low, and then if you've taken insulin for lunch, for instance, and then you have to move, like you got to go, you're working harder, or it's unexpected things, like you can easily crash low, like really fast. And so it tends to be fast and dramatic, kind of sharp. It's very Vata-like, right? And as well, I mean, when your blood sugar is crashing, it's a textbook fight or flight response. I mean, that's what is happening is your body, you're having all the adrenic symptoms, your body sending out all of those same hormones it would in a fight or flight response, like adrenaline, cortisol. Adrenaline is the first thing that's released, or epinephrine, just depends where you live, what you call it. And so someone will feel those symptoms like in the body. It's like shakiness, heat, they'll start to sweat. Everyone's a little bit different. But then the second stage, cortisol, is released. And so what ends up happening for a lot of people, even after they've treated their low and they get back to normal, is that they end up running high later because their body's released all of these hormones, right? So it becomes this kind of vicious cycle of trying to balance things out. But I really see hypoglycemia as vata, although you could see it kind of, there's some pitta qualities to it because of the intensity, but it's generally very depleting. Generally, it's breaking things down. It breaks things down just like vata does. And the strategy for helping someone learn to manage hypoglycemia is it's a Brahmana approach. You want to first calm and soothe them, but then you want to build them back up and nourish them. But it can't be intense. It can't be intense at all. So it has to be really strategic with that. And I find that like yoga nidra is one of the best intervention strategies for after someone's treated hypoglycemia. Granted, we can't fix hypoglycemia with yoga, but what we can do is help to support the process of reestablishing homeostasis and then protecting our body's adaptive responses. Because the more dysregulation, the more someone's running high and low and all over the place over the long term of a disease, it's damaging what is already working, right? So it's damaging the counter-regulatory responses. It's damaging, the autonomic nervous system and many other things. So a lot of the side effects for like long-term diabetes are things like neuropathy, retinopathy, and then as well as all these mental health things that we've talked about. Right.
So it sounds very complex.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
I hope people can follow along. But
no, but I mean, not what you've just said, but the regulation, being able to regulate that. I mean, I'm looking at my life and I can see the swings of my energy and emotions changing, and I don't have diabetes, and I find that quite complex already in itself. Yeah, but this sounds like hours to minutes. You could be changing so quickly in a very short time. Yeah.
And it could be life or death. So
oh, wow.
Living with like the life or death over you, especially with the hypoglycemia, because if that's not treated, you could literally die. People, they're living with that fear, like that immediate fear. So it's really hard to disengage. It's really hard to let go. It's really hard to allow yourself not to be so self-reliant. And I see it in myself, and this is why I help people too. It's like we lie there and try to relax, and we're trying to relax, but it's so hard to let go.
Yeah, and trying already means that you're activating the whole sympathetic nervous system.
Right. So it's really giving people the tools to help them quickly, help them in the midst of the stressor, but also giving them practices that are going to support them in their long-term health. And that is this progressive work.
And I think because of your background, because of this experience of yours, you've been able to go into it so deeply, because even just reading this from your book, Benefits of Yoga Therapy for Diabetes, improved autonomic function, decreases sympatho-adrenal system, increases parasympathetic function, activates brain structures and neurochemical systems, positive changes in brain structure, improves metabolic profile, decreases insulin. All this is like, wow, you've really gone deeply into all of the science to fully understand it and
Yeah.
create this amazing book. Yeah.
Well, it was really important to me to offer that. I wouldn't call myself like a science-minded person necessarily, but I think it's essential for anyone who has diabetes or anyone who's working with someone with diabetes to have that background to understand what is actually happening. Because if we don't understand what is actually happening, it's hard to apply practices just off of theory, right? And I think for so many of us to know those specifics grants more validity and trust in the practices as well, especially in our modern age. You know, everyone has to have some type of corroborative evidence that something works. It's not enough just to say it works.
That's true. I was reading, I think in the book or in your toolkit, why is glycemic control not sufficient to ensure positive outcomes? You'd written that, and I would like to understand that better.
That's a great question, because that was a big part of the whole
book
argument of the book. It's
Yeah.
like the standard medical care, you know, which is to achieve an A1C under 7%. The A1C under 7%, which is your average of blood sugars over the course of 3 months. It's like the standard metric that doctors use, and they say that you need to be under 7% to offset long-term damage. Okay, long-term damage. But I've found so many different stats on this. Some say it's only 50% can actually achieve it. Some say that it's 2/3 of people can actually, only a third of people are actually achieving it. So we look at that number, that only 50 to a third of people with diabetes, type 1 and type 2, are actually achieving the standard medical care, despite all the medical advancements, despite education. And so the question is why? And we could go into a very broad conversation about many things, from social dynamics, you know, from the accessibility to medicine and education, on every social sphere of society, and how that there's a great lack, especially in the United States as well. But what about the people that have all of the information at their fingertips too, and they're still unable to achieve that? And that leads me to, I guess, believe that there is more to this than just education and teaching people how to keep their blood sugars in check. There is so much more to this. And what I believe yoga fills the void of are these lesser valued pillars of health, like stress management, self-awareness, improved sleep, teaching people how to self-regulate, you know. And it's so beautiful. I run this program called Rise Above Type 1. I do it specifically with people with type 1 diabetes, obviously, hence the name. But my group right now, we're in this WhatsApp chat, and they're talking right now about how they never knew that they could just witness their blood sugars and like not be identified with it. And there's a saying in the diabetes community, like, I am greater than the highs and lows. But I think a lot of people don't understand how to truly experience that. Like, they get it conceptually. Yes, I'm more than my blood sugars. But when you learn how to directly experience that through practice, that translates into diabetes care, right? Because it allows you to take the emotion out of it And when you can take that emotion and that identification out of it, you can actually take care of yourself better, because it's not like everything's an attack against you. And then in addition, you can take that awareness and present it to your whole life, because diabetes is just one part of our life. Granted, we have to take care of our health in order for us to live well and to fulfill our dharma in this world, right? Or our purpose in our life. But it starts with diabetes. So I'm a yoga therapist, but I'm also first and foremost a yogi. And I believe that yoga is a path towards enlightenment, towards freedom. And that yoga therapy, the application of the tools and practices for the individual, help us improve our function, condition, happiness, attitudes, these kinds of things. They're necessary, but it shouldn't end right there. It shouldn't be like yoga therapy for your low back and then you're done, or yoga therapy for diabetes and then you're done. That yoga therapy helps us to access what yoga is about.
So it's like yoga therapy is a prerequisite for yoga.
Yeah.
It's a step back.
It is.
Yeah. Even though it's a lot more study, but yeah.
Yeah, it's more advanced, but it's also, I think, the starting point, at least for those that want to use yoga as a health providing tool.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think just for the general practitioner, and I know I'm diverting from diabetes, but a general practitioner, lots of people practice, but they don't know why they're practicing, or they don't know what they need. And I feel like yoga therapy, I know what yoga was, and now it's seeming like the resurgence of what yoga could be. It seems like it's this new frontier of yoga, but it's what yoga's always been.
Yeah,
But
I agree.
I think more people are recognizing that.
The depth.
Yeah, the depth. And so it starts with the individual, right? It starts with the teacher practicing for themselves and knowing things intimately before they can share it.
Yeah, that's very important, and I think most people are getting it. Most teachers are getting it. Oh yes, I'd like to ask you, could you share what the key points are for lifestyle changes that help the diabetes?
I'll start where we're going to end first. So the starting point is to make your whole life sacred, right? And that self-care is the greatest act of self-compassion. And we bring that reverence into every act that we're doing. So it's something that we're living. It's something that we're living instead of like doing as a chore. So how can we make that transition from this is a chore to this is how I live? And the work that I've done, and we could say that this is specific to diabetes, but I'd like to say that it's general for everyone. It starts with self-awareness, right? Becoming more clear and aware of what's going on, what throws us out of balance, what helps us achieve balance, learning how to take responsibility for our actions, seeing that there's a better way, right? When we're not aware, we're not aware. But awareness onto itself is the recognition, even if we don't know what to do about it, it's the recognition that there's a potential for something else, right? So that is the first step. The second is with practice and having some direction, whether that's guided or it's the self-application of it. It's learning to self-regulate or to adapt and shift the way that one feels. So that could be a breathing practice. That could be an asana practice. It could be yoga nidra. It could be meditation. It could be all of the above. But finding something that works and then applying it, and it'd be like a little yoga snack in the afternoon. And so that it's that process of self-regulation that leads to the next thing, which is confidence, right? It's confidence and it's self-efficacy, right? Because so when it comes to behavioral change, we need to feel like what we're doing is working, but it needs to be valuable enough that we're going to continue to do it. And it also has to be easy enough, right? It has to be easy. We have to see that there's value in it, right? And so when we know that when we don't practice, we are going to feel a certain way that's different than when we do practice, that becomes like the drive, right? That becomes the drive. And that takes some time for people, right, to make that shift. And of course, there's people that are like, you'll give them something and they're going to do it. They're like the star students. But a lot of times it's being patient and giving them really small things so that they can feel confident that they fulfilled it and that they're going to continue. And so I feel like that leads into what we were just talking about at the beginning of like being the curator of your life. You know, what do you want to call that? Resilience, self-mastery. When it comes to diabetes, it's so helpful for people to awaken to the fact that they can be in charge, even if they can't completely change every little minute outcome, that they are ultimately in charge. And that's what helps them show up for themselves and make better decisions, because they recognize that they're in charge. And that's one of the most beautiful things, I think, the work that we do.
Yeah, so it's this self-agency and authoring your own life rather than feeling you're at the hands of God knows what. Yeah.
I love Kriya Yoga. I mean, Tapaha, Svadhyaya, Ishvara, Pranidhana.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, that's what it's all about.
Surrender.
It's the surrender, but it's
inquiry,
it's skillfulness in action, right?
Yeah.
It's skillfulness in action. And that one sutra sums up so much of the path. You know, we need tapas, we need the discipline, we need svadhyaya, we need to be sourcing from texts, from our own practice, our own self-inquiry. And then ultimately at the end of the day, it's about surrendering to something that's bigger. And there's so much freedom in that, learning how to access that Ishvara itself as the feeling of me, like the feeling of me is not distinct from the feeling of that. And to be able to return and abide with that, even when it's really challenging, is.
Well, I think when things are most challenging, that's when we turn to that aspect of life. That's what I've noticed. Like things were going pretty well for a while, and then you kind of go, okay, I'll just enjoy life. Yeah. But then when things get hard, it's like, oh yes, my practice, go deeper, let go. Get strength and get that resilience that you were talking about in the beginning.
I feel like you could replace the word diabetes with almost anything, right?
Really? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Okay. Oh, in that sense,
in that
yes.
sense, yeah, definitely. You can say there's specific stuff for diabetes, of course. There's
Mm-hmm.
lots of different practices you can work with
Mm-hmm.
specific things. But the journey we're all on is the same.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I completely agree. Is there anything else you'd like to say or feel that you haven't touched on?
I don't know. There's so much always to say, but I always end up saying the same thing over and over again, which is how much I love practice.
Mm.
So,
Mm.
just for anyone who's out there listening, if a word landed or something, regardless of if you have diabetes or not, or know someone with diabetes, that this is the journey we're on, and it's a really beautiful thing.
Yeah. Oh, this is so lovely speaking to you. You're
Yeah.
very articulate and you say it so powerfully and so easily. Yeah, yeah. And you really mean it from your heart. Um, I just wanted to ask, is there a practice you would like to leave us with?
Yeah. Do you have a recommendation? I mean, we can do a little. I know you had told me that we were going to do this, and I totally forgot. We can
Okay.
we can do. Would you like something that we could reference specific for diabetes?
Yeah, it's your choice.
My choice.
Yeah, of course.
Mhm. Well, I'm a big proponent of pranayama,
Okay.
and that seems like a wonderful way to end this session.
Mm-hmm.
Would be with a nice Brahmana breathing practice
Mm-hmm.
that it's not going to be overstimulating. This is something that I really like to do, especially if I'm feeling foggy or a little bit run down. And I don't want
Okay.
to overly tax my nervous system, but I
Uh-huh.
want to feel really empowered and awake.
Great.
So it's
Yeah.
it's a take on a Chroma inhale. So
Mm-hmm.
Chroma is like a step or a segmented inhale. And sometimes we do segments like half and half. Sometimes you do more, for instance, in the chest or the thoracic cavity, or sometimes more in the abdomen. But this orientation is a little bit more in the thoracic cavity, which is the space above the diaphragm in the rib cage, and a little bit less in the abdomen. And then the
Mm-hmm.
exhale is just a second, it's an extra second longer. So what we're going to do is we're going to build each few rounds. We'll build like a second on each one. So let me just take a step back. That we're going to start with inhaling for 3 counts into the rib cage space, and then pausing for 3. And then we'll inhale for 2 counts into the abdominal cavity, and we'll pause for 2. So you see it's a little bit more in the upper body. And then we'll exhale for 6. So 3 plus 2 is 5. Even with the breath retention, it's more, obviously, but the 6 is 1 second longer. So it's just, it's balancing. And then we'll build on that 1 second on each one. Yeah. So I would say, do we have 10 minutes? Could we do 10 minutes? Okay, cool. And it's Ujjayi. We use Ujjayi pranayama. So a little bit of the valve in the throat, but it doesn't need to be too loud. And if anyone's doing this and they feel like there's tension, it's an indication to back off. So it doesn't have to be a true second. I'm going to time this a little bit faster than I would normally, just so it makes it easier for everyone. Okay. But you can do it slower if needed. Okay. All right. So let's begin. Start settling into the body, lengthen the spine. Place your feet on the ground. And begin to tap into your breath. Ujjayi Pranayama. Progressively valving the muscles in the throat. Feel that gentle vibrational pull on both the inhale and exhale. As you breathe, follow the feeling of breath with awareness, taking note of your current state. Observe the body, the structure of the body, any areas of tension or concentrated sensation. Experience the breath passing through those regions. Notice the quality of energy at this moment. Sometimes we can feel quite energized and uplifted. Sometimes our energy is more heavy or dull. Sometimes it's just clear and spacious. Observe the mind. And similar to the energy in the body, observe the quality of the mind. Sometimes the mind is full of movement and thought. Sometimes the mind is sleepy, cloudy even, heavy. And other times the mind is spacious. So taking note. Now return your awareness to the breath. If you've lost it, come back to Ujjayi. And we're going to begin the Pranayama practice. So I'll remind you, the first part will be in the thoracic cavity. The second part will be in the abdomen. Between each part, there will be an equal pause. So wherever you're at in your breath cycle, please just take a normal inhale and exhale. Now you'll inhale, please, for 3 counts into the chest space, also the upper back. Pause for 3 counts. Now inhale 2 counts to the belly. Let your belly relax, kind of pooch out. Pause for 2. And then exhale for 6 counts, approximately. We'll repeat inhale 3 counts to the chest, upper back. Pause for 3. Inhale 2 to the abdomen. Pause 2. Exhale 6. Inhale, 3. Rib cage, upper back expands. Pause, 3. Inhale, 2. Pause, 2. Exhale, 6. Feel the navel progressively drawing in, the lungs empty. Now we're going to add on here. Please inhale 4 counts to the upper back and chest. Pause for 4. Relax the shoulders. Feel the expansion in the heart. And inhale 3 to the abdomen. Pause 3. And now exhale 8. Inhale 4, expanding the upper back, ribs, chest. Pause 4. Inhale 3 down to the lower belly. And then pause 3. Exhale 8. Inhale 4. Experience the 3-dimensionality of the breath. Pause for 4. Inhale 3. Abdomen relaxes. Pause for 3. Exhale 8. Adding on inhale 5. So slow the breathing down. Pause for 5. Feel the chest, the ribs around the heart expanding. Inhale 4. Navel softens. Make sure you're reserving a little bit of air for the second part. Pausing for 4. And then exhale for 10. Inhale 5. Thoracic cavity expands. Lungs, heart. Hold, retain for 5. Inhale 4. Soften the stomach. Breathe all the way down to the base of the spine. Hold for 4. And exhale 10. Inhale 5. Pause. Inhale 4. Pause. Exhale 10. Slow. Now please inhale just 6. So we're going to counter pose now. Inhale just 6. And then exhale 8. No pause. Inhale 6. Exhale 8. Inhale 4. Exhale 6. Inhale 4. And exhale 6. Now take a moment to adjust your breathing. Let it become more natural and involuntary. And observe the impact of this short practice on the container of energy that's in your body and how it may feel distinct or unique. Space in the body and the mind. Okay, when you're ready, you can lower the chin and come back. I love inhale practices. I mean, there's so much out there about, avoiding inhales and all the medicines in the exhale and avoiding inhaling in your chest, and it all should be in the belly. But, I was taught that we got to meet ourselves where we're at. So for those of us that are living very active, engaged in our work, we're on the go, having something that's slightly sympathetically oriented meets the nervous system where it's at, and then allowing it to move towards the exhale helps it make that transition without so much fighting.
Yeah, but this was lovely. I've never done this practice before. It's great. Yeah. I mean, I've done the steps, but not breaking it up into a sympathetic kind of system. It's really great. I really loved it because it was a very calming way to become awake. Mm-hmm. And then the counter pose, I've never thought about. I mean, I do it naturally, but to actually name my pranayama of counter pose was like, oh yeah. So great.
Yeah. Wind it down. I mean, I've learned so much about breathing from Gary. He's such a wonderful resource for those who out there that want to learn more. Gary Crasso, I've learned so much from him, and so much gratitude for this breathing practice. I think I must have gotten this one from him.
Okay. Yeah, it's great. I love it. Yeah, we'll end here. This has been so wonderful. Thank you, Evan. Yeah.
It was nice to chat with you.
Really great to chat with you. Yeah. And I will put all your links in the show notes, and so people can find you and order your book and learn a lot more about autonomy.
It's where it's at, right?
Yes. Yeah. We'll just say goodbye to listeners. Bye, everyone. Have a wonderful 2 weeks.
Thank you.
So thank you everyone for staying to the end of the podcast. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. I really love doing these talks with these amazing people. And if you want to know more, just take a look in the show notes. There's plenty of links and ways to connect with either the guest or myself. If you want to work with us or find out more about us, just check out the information in the show notes. So I hope you have a wonderful weekend or week, and you'll be hearing from me next week. Bye.